The early Indians, the Calusa Indians around here, relied on the estuary as their food supply. Today, we still have that. We have many people that derive their living by catching blue crabs, by taking fishing charters out and things, so that the estuary today is just as important as it was many years ago.
This is the American Eastern oyster. It's the most common oyster that we have. It's found all up and down the eastern seaboard, around Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico, and all the way over to Texas and the Bahamas. They're mainly found in the estuarine environment where the freshwater and saltwater meet, and especially at the mouths of rivers. And there's a couple reasons for that. They're filter feeders, so they filter out organic particles and single-cell algae to eat, and the rivers can provide that. They also, the freshwater environment relieves them of some of the predation. Their oysters are very prolific, which means they produce a lot of young. One of the things in this area, they reproduce in the late spring, summer, and early fall, which is our warmer months, and also coincides with the hurricane season and our rainy season. So that helps feed the oysters, and in some cases there'll even be large spawning events following a hurricane. A single oyster can produce up to between 10 million and 20 million eggs, and a large oyster will produce around 100 million. Some of the larger oysters will even spawn several times during the year, and interestingly, they can change sex throughout the season. So one spawning event they may be female producing eggs, and another they will be male. Generally, the larger oysters are functional females producing only eggs. One of the things that I like about oysters is not only do they provide food for people and other animals, they're also what I call living condos. So as you can see within the oysters themselves, there's some mussels nestled in there, and they attach through byssal threads at the end. And if we pop a few of these open, if I can do it, you might see some crabs. See these little small mud crabs? I've got one out here that's a little bit larger. When all the oysters are clumped together like this, they form what is called an oyster bar. And during the time after they spawn, the larvae are planktonic, which means they float within the water column until they find a suitable substrate in which they attach. They can do this by forming a type of glue, which allows them to attach to this hard substrate, and then at that point they start producing the shell, and that's sometimes known as spat. People will collect the spat on tiles and use that to reseed bars or cause bars to become bigger and bring in more oysters. Like I said, during low tide, the oyster bar is exposed, and the animals, the organisms like the crabs, and there's even some polychaete worms, which are predatory worm that live within here, will hide within little spaces, especially like the dead oysters, where you can see how that pops open. That makes a nice little hiding spot that'll fill with water, and then at low tide, the crab will stay inside the oyster and will be able to still have his gills wet and live. So there's a lot of things that live within the oysters throughout the tidal cycle. When the tide comes in, then you have fish and other organisms that come and feed on the different organisms that live within the oysters themselves and on the oysters. You'll see toadfish and things like that. Birds are also an important part of the oyster bar. They like to go on the low tide and pick out some of these organisms. The main thing is it's really important that we have good water quality, because oysters are filter feeders. We eat the oysters, and in turn, whatever they eat, we end up eating.